Perfect. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. We have a couple of questions from the chat, as well as preloaded ones. But Sunny Liu asked, where do you draw your inspiration from for your projects? So what's your inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I draw inspiration from visiting different spaces and reading and seeing different projects. And so, for example, just recently, I was telling Christian the other day, my family and I went on a trip to the Sea Ranch area, which is in Northern California, kind of near Mendocino in Sonoma County. And we were walking around this landscape, and there was this just really wonderful project that we passed by, which is called the Sea Ranch. And it has this amazing kind of relationship with building, landscape, and nature. And so just walking around and seeing the buildings there, it really inspired me. And I think being able to see space and experience different architecture and travel a lot, I think that has given me a lot of inspiration.
Awesome. And I know you touched on a little bit, you've always been a creative person, but how did you really discover your passion for architecture? And did you do any extracurriculars in high school that kind of stimulated you in this direction?
Yeah. How did I? Yeah, in high school, I can explain a bit. In high school, I went to a high school that had a kind of magnet program for art and design. It wasn't necessarily geared towards architecture. I went to Irvington, and there was this magnet program. And I went there because I was interested in that magnet program. And I didn't necessarily take a bunch of art courses. I did in my senior year, but I enjoyed those projects where I would kind of, really focus on like cutting and pasting pictures, formatting the fonts. I think those little things kind of gave me an instinct of creativity and allowed me to kind of exercise my creative juices, even though it wasn't your typical, I'm painting like in high school, or I'm doing all these really cool architectural projects. I think those ways to stimulate your creativity in high school, that will definitely help once you decide to pursue architecture.
Awesome. And just following up on that, what suggestions do you have for middle schoolers or high schoolers who are looking to prepare for a profession or a study in architecture?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. I actually I had taught a lot of high school students who were interested in architecture, and I really recommend that if you have the resources to do so, there are these programs that introduce high school students to architecture. For example, I was kind of an instructor for Embark Academy, which is held at UC Berkeley, and it's the summer program geared specifically towards high school students interested in studying architecture when they go to college. And these kind of programs, they're a great opportunity to explore the field of architecture, but they also give you kind of the projects to put in your portfolios, so that if you decide to apply to a school that requires a portfolio component, you can be prepared for that.
Perfect. Someone asked, what are some key differences between architecture and civil engineering in college? So degree-wise.
Yeah, degree-wise, I would say that, architecture, at least in Berkeley, I can speak from Berkeley. At UC Berkeley, architecture is listed under the College of Environmental Design, versus civil engineering is probably in one of the engineering colleges. So it's very different, I would say, in the courses. There is some overlap in terms of you are working in the same industry in some sense, but I would say that architecture is more creative, more design oriented. You do take more classes in history, in design, in representation, and versus engineering, civil engineering is a little bit more technical. You would take much more kind of math, science courses or material courses. But I would say in the future, we do collaborate with a lot of people who have graduated from civil engineering. So one of the closest overlaps I can think of is like structural design. For example, architects would design kind of the structure of the building, but they don't necessarily know how the load paths work. But a structural engineer would kind of be able to design that load path. But we need to know a little bit of everything. So I would call an architect kind of a generalist who knows a lot about everything, but the engineer is somebody who is a specialist. The engineer knows how to solve the problem, and they know a lot about a particular subject versus an architect that has a broad knowledge about a lot of things.
Gotcha. Would you say architecture is a lot more focused on, the math and physics, or is it more creative in that sense where you can kind of do your own thing and not have to rely on, physics and math too much in terms of course load?
Yeah, I think architecture, there's this misconception that, architects need to be great at math and science, but it's actually not true. There's only two requirements. One is Calculus 1, and you can take that at a community college, or you can waive out of it if you take an AP Calculus. And the other requirement is Physics 1, or the first semester of physics. And after that, you don't really take anything more advanced than that. There's programs to help you calculate things if you need to know how certain loads or areas are working. But other than that, I've never had to solve any formulas. I just used a calculator on my computer to help me in my work.
Perfect. For those of the audience members who are in college, how would you say, how could you make the most of your college experience, especially that a lot of it's virtual right now for the foreseeable future?
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the most valuable things about going to college or even grad school is the connections you have with other people. I think that being able to leverage social capital, there's this thing called social capital where, there are connections that you make with professors, with your peers, taking advantage of that and developing good relationships with your professor helps. In college, for example, in undergraduate, my first internship was with my college professor. It's really difficult. I know it's really difficult to get your first internship when internships are requiring, X amount of experience and you don't have all the skills. But I was able to ask my professor, hey, do you think I can intern with you? I would love to learn from you. And, he actually created that internship for me. And in my first internship, I was working in San Francisco, working for a development company. And after that, it was so much easier to find opportunities. And even this summer with COVID hitting, I was debating between interning in a firm in San Francisco, and my professor actually asked me to work for her. And looking back now, working for my professor was actually a very smart decision because, I can be at home, I could be anywhere in the world, and I'm working with her. And from her, I got to see just a side of academia and a side of practice, and I got to learn a lot from this professor. So I'd say in this environment, make sure that you take advantage of relationships with your professor, relationships with your peers and your classmates, because you never know, if there's going to be an opportunity in the future, and you never know what you may be able to offer them or they might be able to offer you.
Awesome. Andrew from the chat asks, how can you build up your portfolio as a college student, graduate, and professional? Any tips or advice?
Yeah, I think one way to build up your portfolio is to iterate multiple times and to show a bunch of people. So for example, when I was applying to graduate school, I had shown maybe 8 people that I trusted, and each person had different feedback. Some people commented on the layout of my portfolio, other people commented on, the sequence of projects, and other people commented on the specific, project design. And so I say, don't be shy to share your portfolio with other people, especially people in the creative field. They can offer a lot of great comments.
Awesome. And another question from Ishan. What skills do you need to get into architecture?
I would say to get into architecture, you need to have creative potential and the ability to think outside of the box. And then learning how to use your hands and make things, being able to be aware of how to, that spatial awareness. So I would say a creative potential and spatial awareness is something I would emphasize.
Gotcha. Reflecting back on, your academic career or your professional career so far, what's one important lesson that you've learned from your experiences?
That's a good question. One important lesson. I would say just being able to not to plan every single step of the way. I think one thing that I really kind of learned was sometimes my plan doesn't always work out. I have this grand plan of where I want to go, but sometimes other things come up. And I think being open to what could be and not being overly prescriptive of what my path needs to be, I think that has been a great lesson of being open to the unexpected, being open for the surprises that happen in when I meet new people, or the opportunities I encounter, and being flexible and being open. That's something I learned.
That's awesome. Suba asks, how is the gender diversity in this field?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's definitely getting better. Maybe 50 years ago, you wouldn't see a lot of women in architecture school. But now more and more you see in architecture school, there is actually more women enrolled in architectural programs. So in graduate school right now, our class balance is 50-50, 50% male, 50% female. Definitely there's challenges for women as we progress into the career. There are still still very male centric when you go up to the professional board level and those who are licensed architects and the owners of these firms. But I would say there is progress, and we're continually on kind of finding ways in balancing that gender equality.
That's awesome. Thank you. And we have time for one or two more questions. And Priscilla asks, what challenges did you face in the firm where you couldn't find in school?
Oh, there's a lot. I think school does prepare you for the profession, but not directly. So for example, UC Berkeley was much more abstract and conceptual. And I would say it prepared me more for graduate school. But for the profession, I think one thing that I learned was that, it is a business and they are making money. And so I learned a lot about, the business of the profession that I didn't learn about in school, like the ways a project manager will keep track of their budget, the ways in which we need to bill our hours, the ways in which they need to balance out, how many people are working how many hours per project. Those are things that are so specific to the profession that you don't learn in school.
Awesome. Last question. How do you manage your stress load in work and your personal life? What's your work-life balance like?
Yeah, it's a good question, because right now with COVID, it seems like work life and personal life are blended and melded together in all aspects. But for me, I think first, not looking at the computer, taking breaks and going outside and taking a walk and talking to people who center you, like talking to your family, talking to friends, and also just, spending time where you're not looking at the screen and you have the space of like meditation, for example, or like, I guess we can call it meditation, but just having that time where you're just, you're not kind of centered around everything that's going on, but kind of channeling what's happening inside and kind of focusing on that inner world. I think that's really key in balancing the stress of every day.